Surprisingly enough, we did have an illness, so we have a last-minute addition, but a wonderful addition to our list of speakers. So I'd like to take the moment to introduce Malik Evans. Thank you. And this is his bio. We understood from Beverly Burrell Moore that she was ill, and so she is not going to be able to be with us today. So what happened was, of course, we here at AAUW, we cast out the net via Mrs. Weathers, and unfortunately, or fortunately, Malik, you were the one that got caught in the net. You didn't run fast enough, I guess. So we certainly do appreciate your being able to present to us. So we're going to have Malik go, because it's got another engagement.
Yeah, I see.
So we appreciate that. So I'm just going to briefly go through your bio, and again, we appreciate your last minute ad. I mean, this was like Friday afternoon, 2:30, trying to make sure that we had representative from a lot of different groups and demographics to present to us. Malik Evans is currently the Business Growth Program Manager at ESL Federal Credit Union. He previously spent 12 years at M&T Bank Corporation as a Vice President. Malik believes that the financial literacy and economic development, in concert with quality education, are keys to improving the lives of citizens in the community. The Rochester resident believes bankers are a vital part of the community. What is key about Malik Evans, and why did we really turn to him to cast that net out, is that I'm trying to go through this really quick. There's a spot in here where Malik was the director of, oh my gosh, let me just glance real quick. I'll just go through. He's a passionate believer in power of education. Mr. Evans ran and became the youngest member ever elected to the Rochester Board of Education in 2003. Evans is involved in many community activities and boards, including the Catholic Family Center, where he serves as the executive committee and currently on the nominating board of governance with the committee, as well as the Reentry Task Force. He's also been involved in the Rochester Area Community Foundation for many years and is currently serving on the board of directors while also serving as a grants distribution and executive committees. Malik is also a member of the Rochester Museum and Science Center's Board of Trustees. One critical piece with this is that, again, Malik was involved, especially with our, I'm trying to say the words and they're not coming to me and I end up seeing them really quick. Okay, so there's something I wanted to say to bring in to have you dovetail to understand why we reached out to Malik. You were president of the city council? School board, that's what I was trying to get. And I don't see that, I'm sorry. And my eyes didn't scan it quick enough to see it. So I just wanted you to understand why we reached out to him to bring in his perspective. And even though I know the first line of the introduction went with his present and his current career with the ESL Federal Credit. So again, thank you very much for coming at the last minute and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you. Good morning. Yeah, last minute, I can't say no to gay now. So, as you know, I've been on the Board of Education for the last 10 years, served as president for 6 years. Currently chair of the Excellence in Student Achievement Committee, worked on the national level with the National School Boards Association for many years, still involved with the National School Boards Association, and I can tell you that Common Core is a hot topic, and even prior to Common Core, was No Child Left Behind. The one thing I'll do today is obviously touch on Common Core, tell you some of the challenges that we see, but also touch on what we're doing here in Rochester. We are implementing Common Core in Rochester. We're doing that. Common Core, obviously, as you know, is extremely controversial. I was just looking at some of the various headlines, just even recently with Common Core and many of the challenges that we see. And you know, Common Core supporter, federal government should never have been involved. Common Core standards fallen out of favor by Nevada or educators. Common Core math becomes focus for parents. Web supports Common Core. Common Core school board members question the advocacy group. So much going on with whether or not Common Core is good or bad. From a Rochester perspective, and from my perspective as a business person, as a person who's been involved in education for at the elected level for going on 11 years, I can tell you that when Common Core was first rolled out and developed, we were pleased because we thought that we needed higher standards, particularly in urban districts. The challenge that we have in Rochester is different than, I know we heard from Greece and BOCES and a lot of these other places. The problem that we have in Rochester, and it's the reason why we are where we are, is that there is lowered expectations for urban students, period. And that's a major problem. So the right and the left are in this firing squad about whether or not Common Core is right or wrong. And my position has always been, it's not really about Common Core, it's beyond Common Core. It's about how do you raise standards to make sure, particularly in urban districts, and that's what I represent, how do you make sure that black and brown children are able to compete globally and do well? So in Rochester, we've tied almost all of our curriculum to Common Core, with no apologies. Some people say Common Core is a corporate enterprise. It is. It's no different than anything else in education. Education is an extremely large business. People get rich off of education. Folks got rich off of No Child Left Behind. When No Child Left Behind first launched, everybody and their mother had a supplemental educational service provider because you were able to get extra tutoring services if you did that. Now you go to any conference. Right now, the New York State School Boards Conference is going on down in New York City. Every vendor is selling wares that align to Common Core. They can help your district get aligned. So in the midst of all that, what we have to pull out is what's good in the standards and what's good in terms of making students being able to compete globally. And I think we've done that in Rochester. I think the school district has actually done, there's a lot of bad things the school district does, but some good things too. And I think a lot of the good things that they've been able to do is to really work to align what it is that we're doing with Common Core. When I was president, and the committee just completed the work, and I think there was an article in the paper today, I appointed a working group of academics, parents. Mary Adams was on our school board, are chairing Common Core, and Mary, who's who's opposed to Common Core, I said, okay, look, I'm going to have this task force that you guys are going to set up. But we know Common Core is not going anywhere. It's not. The law of the land, there's too much money invested in it. You're not putting the genie back in the bottle. So these conversations where you have politicians speaking as if they're going to repeal Common Core is nonsense. It's not going to happen because of the amount of money that's been invested in it, and the train has left the station. So the question is that being that there has been flawed implementation in the way in which it's been rolled out, how can you fix it to still make sure that students are getting that high quality education, and it can be fixed to be geared towards students in a way that is understanding to parents so they understand what's going on, and students are getting those high standards that we want. So this committee that we had in Rochester City School District has made recommendations on how you can make Common Core rich in knowledge and history, but also rich enough where it is interesting to students. So one of the recommendations from the committee, and it's a long list of recommendations, but the board hasn't taken up all of them yet, is that we ensure that a lot of the Common Core curriculum that we get, that it's culturally relevant. Because we have, if you're not familiar with Engage New York, has everyone heard of Engage New York? That's the website that you go on that has the lessons, the examples of what Common Core is. This committee felt as though some of it was lacking for urban students. So you want to make sure that you tie it to them to make sure that it's relevant. So in Rochester, we're doing that. We're making sure that we do that. The biggest challenge, I think, for Common Core has been, from my estimation, has been parents. Parents are wondering, okay, what does this all mean for me? And how do you distill it and put it in a way in which they can understand? Because unfortunately, because of the flawed implementation, in the way in which it was rolled out, it's gotten parents so confused, and they're hearing so many different messages from all sides about whether or not it's right. You have some folks saying, look, it's going to make you be able to compete globally and you're going to be able to do well. And some folks saying, listen, it's too restrictive, it's rigid. It's like reading out of a book and it's making our kids little pegs, and it's taking away creativity in teaching. So what I've tried to do is say to parents, forget the name Common Core. You need to make sure that you demand higher standards for your children, period. One of the best schools in the county, private school at Harley Allendale, Columbia, they don't even use or deal with Common Core. They don't do it. Don't use it, don't deal with it. All their kids go on to college. Obviously, they have different demographics, but the bottom line is that at that school, they have a higher standard and higher expectation. And that's what we need to have in Rochester. Too often, some parents have even said to me, oh, well, the problem with this Common Core is that it's just too hard for my child. My child can't do it. Because they have heard that so much. Sometimes from teachers, sometimes from the community. These are the larger issues that we have to address when we're addressing Common Core. And we have to go beyond just the Engage New York website when we go through what a lesson plan looks like and what all that is. We have to be able to relate it back to parents and community. We have to be able to say to parents, okay, here's what your child needs to be able to know by 3rd grade. Here's why it's important that they're reading on grade level by 3rd grade, and here's why we're laying out lesson plans in this way. So that way, if they're reading by grade level at 3rd grade, we know that they have a greater chance to graduate. Here's why your child needs to go to pre-K, because if they're in pre-K, they're 9 times out of 10, they'll be reading by grade level at 3rd grade, and they'll have the requisite number of Regents credits in 9th grade, which would be an indication that most likely they will graduate on time within 4 years. So this is how we have to make sure we frame these arguments about higher expectations and why it's important. This is why your child should know these number of words when they get into kindergarten, because it's going to help the vocabulary and help the development. So that way, when they take these Common Core tests, these math and these ELA and math tests, there'll be a non-event, because the expectations will be so high and their knowledge base will be so high that these tests will just be a regular course of doing business. But because of the expectations that we set, and because that so many of our students are already so far behind, Common Core has been muddled, and you kind of have to tie it back. I mean, the teachers have a lawsuit, so that ties in with APPR. So people say, wait a minute, isn't Common Core APPR? No, they're two different separate things, right? Because APPR is the teacher evaluation system which you use to evaluate teachers, and then you have Common Core, but it's all been tied in together. So the key is for us as a community is to explain everything in a way that makes parents, particularly parents, understand what exactly is going on, what's happening with Common Core, and why it's important. So I think that's in a nutshell where we are in Rochester. Teachers are using Common Core. Some folks love it, some folks hate it. My bottom line is, for me and the parents that I represent, it's not about a love or hate for Common Core, it's about raising standards, period. It's the way I was raised. I went through the city school district. One of my former teachers are here, but she had high standards. High standards.
Got me in a lot of trouble.
It did. It got you in a lot of trouble. Got you in a lot of trouble. But there were high standards. And you didn't need Common Core to tell you that we needed to have high standards. You just demanded it. And it got you in a lot of trouble because of that. And we need more of that in the city school district. And I submit to all of you that when we do that in the city school district, we'll do better. We will raise the bar, because right now the bar is lowered to the lowest common denominator that is sickening to me. And it drives me nuts when I hear regularly, they just can't do it. There are externalities that are happening outside of the walls of our district that do absolutely impact what's happening. But our students are poised in a position where Common Core, like I said, would just be one thing that they can rise to and blow out of the water. Now, obviously, we have to make sure that we have the important building blocks. And this is why I am unabashed about pre-K and all these other things, because Common Core comes, later on. There's little controversy whether or not you should start prepping kids at kindergarten, 1st or 2nd grade. We need to make sure our kids get the basics first, right? So they can then be able to do those things. But if we stick to the basics and go back to the basics, our students will do just fine. But we have to raise the bar. We have to raise the bar that happens in other countries. It happens in other school districts. It just has to happen. And then we have to navigate through all the controversies that are happening with Common Core. No Child Left Behind got the same controversies, rightfully so. Common Core has a lot of controversies, rightfully so. The one thing I will say that Rochester has tried to ameliorate, and it seems like a lot of the other districts have also tried to ameliorate, is making sure that you really get educators at the table when you start having these conversations about Common Core. I think that is where it missed the mark a little bit. You had people who weren't experts in education trying to talk about something that they weren't experts on, right? You can't do that. And I think that really left a nasty taste in the mouth of educators. And I know because I have an aunt that's a teacher, 2 sisters that are teachers. So trust me, I hear regularly what their issues were, and their issues were never the high standards. It's the communication piece that the last speaker talked about, and making sure that you bring educators or subject matter experts to the table. I'm an expert in finance, and I know governance and school boards, but I'm not an expert on pedagogy, so to speak, right? So it's up to incumbent upon me as a policymaker to say, okay, make sure the right people are in the room when you're having these conversations. And I think that is the rub that lost a lot of people wrong. And then you got some people who are just politicians, and anything that's the flavor of the month, they'll jump on it. I mean, it's just crazy what people who were for because it was this bipartisan thing. You had Democrats and Republicans; they were all together for it. And now you hear some of these folks, and then you act like they never even came up with it. They're trying to hide in the box and say, "Oh, we had nothing to do with it." So you kind of have to navigate through all of that and get to the facts of peel back the layers and say, okay, what is it that we're exactly trying to do? Let's fix the things that aren't working, but still, above everything else, Common Core, No Child Left Behind, whatever you want to call it, it has to be about raising standards for our young people. And I mention urban districts because that's what I represent. And just so you know, the vast majority of kids in this country are in urban schools. They're in places like Buffalo and Rochester and Pasadena, California, and Baltimore. So a large portion of those students are in those schools. And if we don't get that right, we're going to continue to leave thousands of students behind. And this is why people are so concerned about the Rochester City School District. You say, why do people care about Rochester City? Well, because look at the large number of students that are there. And then the multiplier effect of what happens if we don't have higher standards for those students, and if they're not meeting those standards, the cost to society is insurmountable. We'll be paying for it. Our great-great-grandkids will be paying for it if we don't address those serious issues there. And Common Core would just be another program that has come and gone. So I always try to frame, I think when we hear these conversations about Common Core and whether or not it's good or bad, I think we have to keep framing it and say, okay, what is it that we're trying to do? And how can we get our students to be higher standards? And what happens is that it's just become this zero-sum game where people have their fire trained on each other, and then everything gets lost in translation. And I was a mediator. I was a trained peer mediator when I was in high school, and I've tried to mediate some of those Common Core sessions. Oh, it's been tough. I was at a school boards conference in this past year in New Orleans. I left the room. I mean, it was crazy the way you had and these were school board officials. The folks that were for Common Core, the folks that were against it. I mean, they were at different sides of the rooms, and then they threw in charter schools, and then they threw in evaluation systems, and it was overwhelming. And we never got to talking about the things that they agreed on. And here's the ironic thing is, most people agree that they want higher standards for kids, but it's the roadmap that you take to get there. And I think that's what we have to try to stay focused on. And that's why I was so happy when we put this committee together in the district, where we said, okay, look, we know many of you on this committee, you hate Common Core, but you know it's here. So what can we do to make it work for our district? And I think that's what we have to try to do. Each district has to see what they can do to make those higher standards work. But speak out when the state does crazy things. And I think the state has done some things, and they dialed back. They've been very strategic recently in saying, okay, wait a minute, maybe this what we did didn't make sense. And I think they have to be able to be flexible in doing that. I mean, I think that the federal government has started to be flexible with No Child Left Behind because they haven't reauthorized it in 10 years, right? They haven't reauthorized the No Child Left Behind Act in 10 years. It represents an unfunded mandate, and we have to make sure that Common Core doesn't get that way. That states start saying, okay, districts, you need to be able to do these things, and then the funds aren't there to cover it. The last piece I'll say, and then I don't know if there's questions or that we're taking.
Take questions later.
Okay, later. So the last thing I'll say is that I think that it's important for folks in this room to make sure that they advocate to the policymakers that are making the decisions about Common Core and educational policy to really hold them accountable, to see, not to test them, but to make sure that they're keeping students, educators, and parents in mind. Because what happens sometimes, it's amazing. Like you go to Washington, D.C., as an advocate for the New York National School Board Association, and you're telling them sometimes what's in the bill that they passed or wrote, right? So it's kind of strange. It's like, wait a minute, you're the one who passed this, you should be telling us. So it's very important that people pay attention to this thing. And I think what happened with Common Core was the National Governors Association, they kind of wrote it, and then it came out. But I think that it was kind of an after fact where people weren't as tuned in into what was going on. So I think it's very important. Even as a message to our students, people have to pay attention to a lot of these conversations that are happening around all policies, but particularly educational policy, because that just affects everybody. And I realize that almost everyone is an expert in education because everyone went to school for. So everybody's an expert in educational policy. That's a good thing, but it also could be a bad thing, as evidenced by some of the policies that we get. So I would encourage all of us to make sure that we keep an eye on what's happening with those policies, and even at the district level, even at the school board level. If you live in Rochester or Brighton or Greece or wherever you live, make sure you pay close attention to what's happening there, because it all filters down the federal government to the state to the local level, and schools are supposed to be under local control, and ultimately the local districts are supposed to have most of the control. That has not been the case over the last couple of years because of No Child Left Behind and Common Core, where it's been a little bit more prescriptive. But it is critical that we really pay attention to what's happening, and that you make your voices heard. And if we can make our voices heard prior to the sausage being made, I think we'll be better off, because it becomes so much more difficult to put the genie back in the bottle once it's out. And I think that's what happened in a lot of these things. So, Common Core, No Child Left Behind, and a lot of these policies have gotten messy for districts because the decisions have been made, you've been given guidance, and then you have to try to go back and fix it while the car is still moving. If we can pay more close attention to fixing it before the train leaves the station, before the car starts rolling, it would make my job a lot easier. I think it will make all of our jobs a lot easier. So I thank you for inviting me here. I'm sorry that Beverly couldn't be here. She would have been much better looking and probably much more eloquent than I would have been. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.